Hello, everyone. Welcome to Goucher Environmental Dialogues. I'm Dr. Jen DeRosa. I'm the director of our Environmental Sustainability and Management program here at Goucher College. And if this is your first time joining us for this webinar, or for this speaker series, I should say, the Goucher Environmental Dialogues is this ongoing web-based speaker series in which we feature interviews and cultivated conversations with environmental, sustainability, and climate leaders, visionaries, and innovators. And this series, as I mentioned, is hosted by Goucher College, specifically our master's degree program in environmental sustainability and management. If any of you have questions about the master's degree in environmental sustainability at Goucher College, I am going to be hosting an information session later this month on October 28th at 12 o'clock noon Eastern Time. And in a little bit, when I'm done introducing our guest today, I'll post a link to our link tree in the chat, and that will include links. It's a single link, but it'll take you to several others, like how to learn about the information session later this month, how to watch recordings of past environmental dialogues that we've done. And then in general, if you just want to follow us on social media, all of those links will be in there too. For our conversation today, we're focusing on and discussing mosquitoes, avian malaria, and how a warming climate are slowly decimating the Hawaii honeycreeper populations. And for anyone who's not familiar with honeycreepers, we'll talk a bit more about why they're special and what they are, but they're these unique, colorful, really charming birds that you find that are endemic to Hawaii. And our guest today is Dr. Oswaldo Villena. And Oswaldo Villena is a research fellow at the Earth Commons at Georgetown University. His research integrates statistics and GIS to understand ecological processes in epidemiology and public health, with focus on the effects of climate change on vector-borne diseases. Oswaldo's paper, titled The Influence of Environmental, Geographic, Sociodemographic, and Epidemiological Factors on the Presence of Malaria at the Community Level in Two Continents, was recognized as one of the top 100 most downloaded microbiology papers in 2024. That's really cool. Oswaldo holds a PhD in Marine, Estuary, and Environmental Sciences from the University of Maryland, College Park, a master's degree in Environmental Science from Towson University, and also a Master of Science in Agrarian Innovation for Rural Development from the National Agrarian University in Peru. His most recent work examined the environmental and geographic factors that influence malaria transmission in South Africa. So please join me, and I realize this is a webinar, so your cameras are turned off and you're muted the entire time, but you do have the ability to use the chat. So please join me by giving a warm welcome to Oswaldo by indicating in the chat where you're logging in from today. And then keep in mind, if you have any questions during our conversation, you can ask them by typing them into the chat, and I will try to give voice to them towards the middle or end of our conversation. So thank you, Oswaldo, for joining us today. And I guess a good way to kind of get us started is if you could maybe tell us a little bit more about Hawaii honeycreepers and why they're special and why they're uniquely vulnerable to mosquito-borne diseases like avian malaria.
So first, thank you so much, Jen, for the nice introduction. So Hawaiian honeycreepers are special little birds, like using my background. These cute birds, they can arrive in Hawaii as a one species thousands of years ago. So most theories say like these European finches arrive in Hawaii maybe by a storm or maybe looking for food. So it's just one species of finch that arrived from Europe thousands of years ago to the Hawaiian Islands before even people was present in Hawaii. So from this one unique finch, they evolved and radiated into 80 plus honeycreepers with different colors, different shapes, different ways of feeding. Like you can see the different kind of beaks in my background. Some of them were like they feed on nectar, some like will feed on seeds. So they really play a big role on shaping Hawaii because these birds disperse seeds through Hawaii, or they do most of the pollinations in Hawaii. So these honeycreepers is something similar to what happened in the Galapagos. I am sure maybe you didn't hear about the honeycreepers before today, but I am sure that most of you hear about the Darwin's finches in the Galapagos. It was a similar process. In the Galapagos, from one finch, all these Darwin's finches species in the Galapagos start as one, and they, through radiation, speciation, and evolution, they become multiple different species through thousands of years. Some similar happen in Hawaii. But since these honey creepers populated Hawaii, they also cannot develop in very high isolation. So Hawaii is one of the most remote islands. This group of, we know, most of us, we know there are like 5 islands, but in reality, there are like 138, and a 138 island is coming. They say approximately 3,000 feet below waters, but it's going to be on 138 islands very soon. But all these honey creepers they're isolated from everything. If they have at some point some immunity to malaria, the first one that they arrive, they lost during this process of radiation and evolution in Hawaii. So once the first Polynesians arrived, like approximately 1,000 years ago, they brought the first threat to these honey creepers. They brought like especially some feral cats, feral predators, that they start to causing some problems, but Polynesians respected most of the forests. They respected the birds. But on the other hand, around the 1700s, the Europeans arrived to Hawaii. Europeans didn't respect too much the nature of Hawaii. So besides introducing more cats, rats, they introduced rats into Hawaii. They also start like cutting the forests. So they were creating this habitat that later on will become like a perfect habitat for mosquitoes, which mosquitoes arrived in Hawaii in the 1800s. There are different theories, but the most accepted theory is that they arrived on whaling ships, that they were bringing these barrels with water for drinking, but they were like washing these barrels and refilling with fresh water in Hawaii to going back to their origins. So when they were doing this process of rinsing, cleaning the water barrels, they were leaving the mosquito eggs in Hawaii. So that's the most accepted theory, how mosquitoes arrive in Hawaii, the mosquito that transmit malaria. Also, later on, Europeans also introduced the malaria parasites in exotic avian species. Hence, so the parasite also, both of these are invasive. The parasite, Plasmodium relictum, that causes avian malaria, and Culex quinquefasciatus, that is the vector of this parasite. So this was it is one of the most detrimental, lethal, mortal disease for Hawaiian honey creepers because they were completely susceptible, naive populations to avian malaria. They never experienced this. And on top of this, immigrants brought like feral cats, rats, and to make worse, when there were the big sugar plantations in Hawaii, rats become a big problem for the sugar plantations. So what farmers did, what we can do to control rats, they brought the mongoose.
Mm.
So they introduced the mongoose to control rats. However, these two animals have different behavior. Usually rats are nocturnal, but mongoose has most of their activity is during daytime. So they really didn't match. So the mongoose end up like feeding on the eggs of honeycreepers and other birds, so it becomes another problem for honeycreepers. So this is a very complex situation for honeycreepers. And also I will mention now the population of feral pigs has highly increased in Hawaii, which adds another problem to honeycreepers because feral pigs, like any pig, they love to roll in mud. And when they do this, they create these cavities. And also when they walk through the mud, they create like wallows, these kind of holes, where when it rains, it collects water. So that's a perfect habitat for mosquitoes. And besides that, also human population has been growing. So urbanization has been growing. And there are multiple studies besides the study that we carry that definitely is high correlation between human population and mosquito habitat. We humans, we love to have like, plant saucers that we don't check for water, plastic pools, wheelbarrows, fish ponds in our backyards, all of these things that can collect water, it becomes a perfect habitat for mosquitoes. Similar with converting forest to farmland has caused the same, where big tractors, the wheel of tractors go, they leave these holes, or the activity of cattle farming, and they leave these cavities, holes on the ground that collects water and become a good habitat for mosquitoes. So honeycreepers has been going through a lot of things. Of course, the worst has been so far avian malaria, that is completely like decimating their populations. Once there were, like as I say before, like plus 70, plus 80 honeycreepers, and today there are only 17 left. And one of these, the kiki, there is only one last individual in the wild today. And there is of this species, there is another hunter that is in captivity, trying to do like some captivity breeding, but there is another concerns about that we can talk in a little bit if you want about this. What's the concern of breeding honeycreepers in captivity? It's like they don't do very well as they do in the wild. Honeycreepers are kind of special creatures. So for example, there has been multiple studies that have proved like honeycreepers, like us, they like to choose our couples. When honeycreepers can choose their partners, they have higher reproduction rates, more eggs. But when humans, we try to force them to mate in captivity and they cannot choose their partner, the rate is very low. Besides that, like trying to rear any kind of animal in zoos on this is very hard because it's hard to really put together a diet that they have in the wild. This is happening with honeycreepers. Besides that, these chicks from honeycreepers, that some of them like hatch in captivity, they don't have the opportunity to observe other similars or learn from their parents' parenting skills. So sometimes they don't have good parenting skills, how to survive, and it's very hard now to reproduce them in captivity. So that's another big problem for honeycreepers. So that's the current situation of these kids. So we have 17 left. Of these 17, 14 of them are with some of them with less than 200 individuals, some of them with less than 1,000 individuals in the wild, which also makes difficult for them to find a partner. And also with this small number of individuals, there is the risk of genetic issues. We know like when there is not a lot of diversity, we can have genetic issues in the new generations. So all of this is going with honeycreepers in Hawaii.
It's really sad to think about how there's so many factors conspiring against them. And thank you for like the analogy of the honeycreepers being like Darwin's finches are to the Galapagos is very much how the honeycreepers are to the Hawaiian Islands. Indeed, you can even see that from your visual behind you with their different beak shapes and colorful nature and the many different things that they feed on. And I've had the benefit of being able to take students to the Big Island of Hawaii a long time ago, twice actually. And it really brings it home because you see like wild pigs roaming around and you know that they're messing up the environments and the forests that these birds need. I didn't see a ton of rats, but I noticed a lot of mongoose running across the road because you think, is that a squirrel or a cat? And it's a mongoose. They're all over the place. And then I remember at the lower elevations, there was a lot of mosquitoes. And I think that's just things that we tend to think might be normal, like having cats outside or mosquitoes and things like that. We have to remember that these birds did not evolve and adapt in an environment where those things existed. Like as they were evolving over time, there were no cats or rats or mosquitoes. So my next question for you is also more specifically about global warming and climate change. How is climate change influencing the mosquito populations in Hawaii, or in general, how is it? How does that bear on the future survival of the honeycreepers?
So besides all these complexities that I talk about honeycreepers, so now we have one of the biggest issues, not only in Hawaii, in our planet. So global warming. We know, like, if I ask you to tell me, or people in the audience, they can write in the chat, what was the year that we have the highest record of temperature, or the hottest year in record in our planet?
I'm gonna peek if anyone's writing anything yet. Max is guessing 2024. Isabella is guessing 2024. Kate is suggesting 2023. I'm gonna say it's got to be within the last 5 to 7 years, because I feel like every year we hear this is the hottest year ever on record. So what do you think?
Exactly. So the hottest year in record was 2024. And guess what was the previous hottest year in record?
Was it 2023?
2023. And we go back in the last 10 years, we have 7 years that were the hottest years in record. And just this past year, we passed the 1.5 degrees Celsius that the Paris Agreement say we shouldn't go above 1.5 degrees Celsius in average for our whole planet. And we just passed this warning. So this is happening also in Hawaii. So I will put this very in simple words, what is a more complex issue, but literally when mosquitoes arrive, they were in the lowlands of Hawaii, close to the coast, because it was where it was the warmest, humid, and mosquitoes thrived there. So honeycreepers kind of start moving to higher elevations, to medium, high elevations in the different islands, kind of escaping from mosquitoes to colder environments where it was safe, kind of a refuge for these birds. Unfortunately, this refuge didn't last for a long time. Hawaii started getting warmer, so mosquitoes start going higher in the elevation. They start to move to middle elevations, and in the last study that we did like a couple of years ago, we already saw that mosquitoes reach the higher elevations of the 5 islands in Hawaii, at least the 5 big ones. 4 already have the optimum temperature for mosquitoes to reach the top. In the big island, there is like a couple of 100 meters of kind of refuge for some of these birds, but very few of them. So this is what's happening with global warming. So it has warmed most of Hawaii. Now mosquitoes can thrive everywhere in Hawaii. So honeycreepers cannot go anywhere else to escape from mosquitoes. So this is the big picture now. And Hawaii is a big island, very remote. There is no access to many of these places. To find this data was a big effort of the USGS, the Pacific Island Ecosystem Research Center. They did an amazing job deploying technicians with traps by helicopter. They were deploying these technicians in different parts of Hawaii in the forest for 10 days with these traps to assess where mosquitoes occur and how many mosquitoes were there. So the interest of our research that we put together in the paper that you mentioned, it was to try to ID where mosquitoes are and how many mosquitoes are there. Why we want to know this? Because we want to release mosquitoes that have been like modified in the lab with this Wolbachia. So we can infect these mosquitoes with Wolbachia in a technique called IIT, insect incompatible technique, or mosquitoes incompatible technique. Mosquitoes in nature, they have one strain of Wolbachia. But the idea is to put a different strain of Wolbachia. So when these mosquitoes mate in nature, a modified mosquito with a wild mosquito, the eggs will be unfertile, so they won't hatch. So, but to do this is hard work because we only want to release males, because as we know, males don't bite. If a mosquito don't bite, they cannot transmit malaria. So we only release male mosquitoes infected with this Wolbachia to the wild so they can mate with wild females, and the eggs will be unfertile, so no larvae, no pupae, and no more mosquitoes, and eventually you will crush the population in the wild. You cannot do a release for the whole island because that will be like almost impossible from cost. So the goal of this project was to ID the location where mosquitoes were most abundant and to do like targeted releases. So this is a lot of labor. Now they're doing like kind of like some more mechanized selection of the mosquitoes in the lab. Before it used to be like people under the microscope trying to see which pupae is male, which pupae is female. Now they are trying to use kind of how you select fruit, trying to see by the size of the pupae and the way these kind of very tiny little holes that they pass with water, and the male pupae will kind of lay down on one tray and the females in a different tray. And you need to do a micro injection with Wolbachia in the tiny eggs, which is also very labor intensive. And once these releases needs to be massive, because with all this treatment of infecting these mosquitoes with Wolbachia, they kind of become like as not good competitors. They have some effect on them, so they cannot compete in a similar conditions with the wild male mosquitoes. So usually the rule of thumb is like you need to release at least 5 to 10 modified mosquitoes, male mosquitoes, to compete in the wild to mate with wild females. This has been proved in many countries like Brazil for Zika, chikungunya. They have been doing this, has proved like to crush populations. So this is kind of a big hope now in Hawaii, releasing this kind of mosquitoes to crush the wild mosquito population so it can be less transmission of avian malaria. And eventually, like these birds that are trying to rear in captivity, maybe release again in the wild and try to save at least the 17 that still are present in Hawaii. Because once these birds are gone from Hawaii, they will be gone from our planet. The only place they exist is in Hawaii. They are native, endemic to Hawaii. So once they are gone from Hawaii, we won't have any longer these honeycreepers. It seems kind of weird, like talking about, when we talk about extinction, sometimes we think about the dinosaurs, I don't know, Jurassic Park movies, but extinctions are happening right now. It's not only birds. There is animals, plants. There is a bunch of plants also like that are kind of like going to extinction in Hawaii, and probably this will be like exacerbated more because these honeycreepers play a big role dispersing seeds and pollinating trees. Again, besides other invasive that humans brought here, like ungulates that are like feeding on this. So this is kind of like the hope for honeycreepers is to get the resources to make massive releases of infected mosquitoes with Wolbachia. And there is another techniques that are under development that is like modified genetic modified mosquitoes that kind of like gene expression on mosquitoes, so mosquitoes cannot like reach adulthood or they cannot reproduce. but this is still in early development, and also is like more expensive than releasing mosquitoes infected with Wolbachia. Besides that, there is like many concerns in the public, like always when we talk about genetic modified organism, there is like some kind of reaction. So this probably will take longer. So now I think most of the hope of Hawaii organizations, non-profit, Hilo University, USGS are like in massifying the release of mosquitoes infected with Wolbachia.
That's really interesting because I mean, when you think about it, well, I mean, I've heard the expression that Hawaii is ground zero when it comes to extinctions, because there's an enormous number of flora and fauna that are endemic, unique to the island, found nowhere in the world, and with the pressures that exist today and all of the things that people have brought with them when they populated the islands, it's just really exacerbated the stress on the native population of the flora and fauna. But I really find this concept fascinating, where you take mosquitoes and male mosquitoes and you infect them, and then you just kind of you put them out there and you have them in a sense almost sterilize the
Yep.
females. So what a really creative way. So I was going to ask you about like conservation or management efforts that are currently underway to protect the honey creepers. How far along are they with these infected mosquitoes? Have they been like releasing them for several years? Are they seeing any population numbers of either mosquitoes going down or honey creepers going up, or is it still too soon to tell?
So I would say it's too soon to tell. Just in the last 2, 3 years, they have really like starting to do massive releases using drones and helicopters, like releasing this capsule with mosquitoes in the forest that they kind of biodegrade and releases the mosquitoes.
Mm.
Again, because it's very remote. When the middle high elevations, there is no roads. So the
Yeah.
only way is to send helicopters or drones to release this. And the other question is, again, how to track if this is a really effective, like it has been proved in some countries in Africa or Brazil. So it's like how to do the trapping, to do again the analysis. Are we really crashing the population? Again, everything unfortunately reduces to always to economic resources.
Mm.
So there is a lot of non-profits, birds, no mosquitoes, USGS, Hilo University, many organizations, they are starting to do this, but the scale is still small. It needs to be massified. And I really kind of like congratulate you and Goucher University for doing this kind of webinars, because we need to bring this awareness to mainland. Many people don't know that it's happening in Hawaii. Sometimes, like I say, sometimes when we talk about extinctions, sometimes I talk with my students, and I say extinctions, everybody, oh, the dinosaurs. But extinctions are happening in front of our eyes every day. And there are, unfortunately, this is my personal opinion. I am not against that, but we are talking a lot about let's bring back the dinosaurs. There are many labs investing a lot of money trying to let's bring back the dinosaur, doing a lot of investments, trying to do genetic work, trying to recover DNA, or even trying to mix DNA from other species to try to look like a dinosaur. But why don't invest in saving the current species that are going to be extinct in the next 5, 10 years, or maybe next year or in 2 years? Why don't invest the resources in this? Kind of similar. We want to go to Mars, but we don't want to put resources to save our planet from global warming, climate change. Every year we hear the hardest year in record, but news, but actions, like we don't see too many actions. So this kind of, I think this is kind of cool, this kind of have these talks to bring awareness to mainland and all these kind of issues. Besides Goucher talking to their students, talking to the community and a more broad audience. So this is needed and is needed now. And like I say, they need to be massive releases. And the other issue is that you can know, once you start releasing these infected mosquitoes, you can not stop releasing them. As soon as you stop, again, when the population is crashing, you stop releasing these mosquitoes, the population start to going up very fast again. Mosquitoes has a very short life cycle, like of weeks, 3 weeks, 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, depending the temperature, precipitation. So you need to be constantly releasing these infected mosquitoes into the wild to be able to really crush these populations.
That's a very good point. And I'm looking at our chat, and we had an earlier question from Kate, who said she's visiting the Big Island in 2026 and wondering if there's what she can do to learn more about the honeycreepers and to be part of the solution. I know I was going to recommend, Kate, when I took students to the Big Island, a couple things. Most of the honeycreepers, as Waldo mentioned, are at a higher elevation. A lot of them are found in like Hakalau National Wildlife Refuge. And if you're like visiting the volcano at Volcanoes National Park, there are, if I remember correctly, there are a few species that are at low elevation. Not many. Most of them are all at higher elevation. And if you don't see them, you can hear them with like your Cornell lab. What is the Cornell lab, Oswaldo, that has the bird audio sounds?
Uh,
Um, is
I,
it
I,
Merlin? Is that what it's called? The Merlin app?
I something that I can remember on my head, but I can post it
Yeah,
later on in the
in the
chat. But
chat.
that's a good one. Another good one is birds, no mosquitoes. That is also related to Cornell and
Yeah.
Fern that work with trying to say this. That's a good way that you can go to the web page and just birds, no mosquitoes. And if you go to the island, definitely visit the Pacific Island Restoration Ecosystem
Mm-hmm.
System. Hilo University is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
And as Jen said, most honeycreepers now they are in high elevations, except two,
Mm-hmm.
the makiki and the papane. So that was good
Papapani.
that you
That's the one I
brought
was
that.
thinking.
Yeah, because these are the only two honeycreepers that are kind of like evolving some kind of resistance to avian malaria. There is still studies going, some things that is the biota in their guts that is kind of like providing these kind of mechanisms, but it's not clear response how still this evolution process, they are kind of surviving, and you can find very well established population of these two honeycreepers in lowlands, but they are the only two. The other 15 or the 17 left, they are really every year their populations are crashing by a lot because avian malaria is increasing. The other issue is these two honeycreepers that are kind of doing well, they are becoming a big reservoir for avian malaria, for the parasite. So the parasite now is in these birds. Besides that, there is another invasive species from Japan, another bird that has become a big reservoir also for the parasite. So that
Mm.
mosquitoes can bite these birds, take the parasites and take to the honeycreepers that are susceptible, naive to this disease. And this disease it kills them like in 3 weeks, less than a month. It's very fast because it affects their red blood cells. The parasite affects there. So we know that the red blood cells carry oxygen. So they have less oxygen carrying their organisms. Many of them, they develop anemia and eventually they get weak and eventually they die. So there are many organizations now that can be visited in Hawaii or visit their webpage. And also, you are from Hawaii and you want to contribute to this, also try to remove anything that holds water in your house or talk to your neighbors to try to reduce the habitat for mosquito. That's another big thing that many organizations, local governments in Hawaii are doing a lot of education with the schools, the university, try to educate people to try to reduce mosquito habitat because it's a kind of consensus that the only way to save the honeycreepers is to reduce the mosquito population. Is that only solution at this point to save the honeycreepers?
I want to ask you a bit more about your work because I know you had mentioned in some of our previous conversations, you integrate a lot of statistics and GIS, which for folks out there who maybe aren't familiar with GIS, it's like a smart mapping system. And you use these tools to understand ecological processes. So how do these tools help us better predict and manage the spread of disease and the impact that humans have on wildlife? And you can also, I know we've been talking about Hawaii, but you've done work elsewhere too, so feel free to draw on some of your other work to respond to that.
So we use these different models. I just will put in simple words. So for determine like occurrence and abundance of mosquitoes in Hawaii, we use machine learning. We use classification and regression trees. And the goal of this was to see where the mosquitoes were and how many, and we put this in a map. So when they do the release, they can go and release in these specific points where there is high abundance of mosquito. And this was the collection of 3 years of mosquito data. So like I was mentioning before, technician collected data for 3 years. We selected like some points in low elevation, some points in middle elevation, and some points in high elevation. And we collected using traps to target mosquitoes. So we use gravity traps. Gravity traps attracts females. So after a female gets a blood meal, kind of similar to happen here with us, when you are in your backyard, here we have the Asian tiger mosquito, this mosquito that has the striped legs. So when they get your blood, or they get from the birds, they will look for a place to lay eggs. So we use this trap that was with an infusion from different grasses, and we attracted them to see how many females already got the blood. And we use like a CO2 trap. We call CO2, we put CO2 there to attract the mosquitoes because can simulating kind of our breeding. And we collected this data for 3 years. And this data we model using the different geographic coordinates where traps were placed to see where the mosquito is more abundant and where the mosquitoes are present. Besides that, we evaluated, in Hawaii, we evaluated 3 variables. Temperature, because as the island is getting warmer, we found like temperature is a key in Hawaii. And like I said before, there is almost no more room for the honeycreepers to go higher and find a refuge. But also precipitation is playing a big role because we found like precipitation is diminishing in Hawaii. There is less precipitation. When you hear this, there is less precipitation in Hawaii, anybody can think, oh, this is good news. Less precipitation will be less mosquitoes. In theory, that can be, sounds good, but the problem is when there is less precipitation, actually mosquitoes don't like a lot of precipitation. When there are heavy rains, their habitat of mosquitoes is washed out and they carry the larvae, the pupae, the eggs are carried out. But when there is low precipitation, the stream flows go down and it creates these small pools where mosquitoes can lay their eggs, the same with the feral pigs that made these kind of crevices, wallows, this. When there is heavy rains, they can be like kind of like wash out. But when there is less precipitation, they form this nice kind of habitat for mosquitoes. So actually we found that mosquitoes thrive when there is 800 millimeters of precipitation. If it's higher than that, mosquitoes population will crash. But unfortunately, it's a bad combination for Hawaii. We are having less precipitation, creating good habitat for mosquito, and higher temperature. And we found similar. This is similar happened with other research that I was doing in Africa and Asia. With how different parasite. As I mentioned, for avian malaria is Plasmodium relictum. There are different plasmodiums for human malaria. I study a lot Plasmodium falciparum, that is the main vector in Africa, and Plasmodium vivax, that is the main parasite in Asia. And I studied, and also the other difference is that Anopheles mosquitoes, they transmit the parasite for humans, while Culex quinquefasciatus is the vector for avian malaria in Hawaii. But these Anopheles mosquitoes in Africa, there are called Anopheles gambiae, and these mosquitoes usually thrive in rural areas. But what's happening now in Africa is also an Asian mosquito, Anopheles stevensii, is invading Africa. In 2012, it was found the first population of Anopheles stevensii in Djibouti. Today, there is already present in 8 states in Africa. Sudan, Niger, Congo, all of these are now with Anopheles stevensii, and I suspect there is more than 8. Probably the lack of surveillance, or maybe still very small population that is hard to detect. I suspect there is already present in more regions in Africa. But what's the problem with Anopheles stevensii in Africa? That this mosquito is very well adapted to urban areas in Asia. You can find in this building that has 50 floors, 60 floors, the mosquitoes laying eggs in plant saucers in the 60, 70, 100 floors in China. Yikes. Thriving there, laying eggs. And if this mosquito becomes established in Africa, this can be catastrophic, because you will have the vector for the rural area, and you will have the vector for the urban area. So now you will have malaria all over Africa in both places. Besides that, probably most of you already heard that there is a resurgence of malaria in Africa. Since the Melinda Gates Foundation, they invested a lot of resources in Africa. Unfortunately, USAID, that was kind of shut down in the US, they also invested good amount for malaria in Africa, but malaria was crashing in Africa, going down since 2000 to 2012. We found in our research malaria was going down, but in 2012 malaria started to go up. Why? The main thing is mosquito resistance to pesticides. So they used to impregnate these nets for beds with pesticide, where mosquito will come, try to bite humans, and they will just get in contact with the chemicals and die. But now it's like they don't die because they are resistant to this, and malaria is coming back. If you get this new vector in Africa established and malaria going up, and there is a new vaccine that was just in kind of trials now in Africa from Oxford, kind of using COVID technology that seems promising. So far, it's like offering like 75% of protection with 3 doses, and if you add a booster, it can protect to 80%. But the problem has been, scientists has been trying to develop a malaria vaccine since the 60s. Has been many malaria vaccines, I can name them, but the problem is after 1, 2, 3 years, they banned the protection. Parasites are more complex than viruses, and it's not one. I told you, for avian malaria is one parasite. For malaria in Africa is one parasite. In Asia, you have another parasite. And besides that, to add complexity, parasites go in 2 different life cycles. So they have the life cycle in the human, if we are talking about human malaria, and in the mosquito, the Anopheles mosquito and the human. If we talk in the avian malaria, they need to go a cycle in the birds, and they need to go a cycle in the mosquito. So they develop very fast mechanisms to go around the vaccine and develop some immunity. So it's more complex. I really have a lot of hope in this new technology that they are using to the new vaccine, but similar. We found that temperature, global warming, is playing a big problem for malaria, because probably, now most species with global warming, they are moving to northern latitudes because they will offer more colder environments, because areas close to the equator, they will become so hot that even mosquitoes, they won't be able to survive there. So they are moving to northern latitudes. So they will start invading countries that don't have malaria previously. And it can happen same to the honeycreepers. There will be naive population that they don't have resistance to malaria, and they will have malaria in 5, 10 years from now. So our research that we did in Asia and Africa is trying to predict where malaria is going to show up, and it's all these countries in the northern latitudes. And similar, we found that precipitation plays a big role. as precipitation is changing with climate change, we have now very strong rains that last 1, 2, 3 days, and after we had long droughts. All of this is also changing the habitats of mosquitoes, and also we assess like how deforestation is playing a big role on creating new mosquito habitat, because people can think like mosquitoes like very dense vegetation. No, mosquitoes like kind of 50 to 60 vegetation cover. They don't like too dense. They don't like open spaces either, but with 50, 60%, they love it. If it's low vegetation, much better. So clearing forests and planting crops is another way to create mosquito habitats. So this is kind of like similarities between malaria in humans, malaria on avian species. So all these factors are playing a role, and definitely humans are playing a big role introducing new species into new areas. That is, before people, we don't travel too much. Now there are like, you see the map of flies every day or ships every day. It's like
You can
movement
go
of
anywhere now.
species. Exactly. And you carry with that any kind of invasive species. Like, for example, probably you hear about the longhorn tick that just arrived in New Jersey in 2019, and they think it arrived in these dogs. That was this family who brought their dogs to Europe.
Oh,
I think it was Europe or Asia. I don't remember very well. But I think they brought their dogs back with a tick, and they didn't notice.
It was a hitchhiker.
Exactly, and they didn't notice in the control. It's supposed you need to control all this, but our control in the US was not very good, and it arrived in New Jersey 2019. Scientists from Rutgers University, they founded this just around New Jersey, and now it's present in 6 years. You have presence in 8 states in the US.
Wow.
What consequences we will have, how they will interact with other ticks, how they will interact with deers. And so that's a big question to us. And this movement of species is becoming a big issue. We need more control. We need to follow a little bit like Australia, doing that kind of very rigorous control about invasive species. Again, islands are very susceptible, like Hawaii, New Zealand, the Galapagos. So because this species has kind of evolved radiated in these isolated worlds.
No, we got a question earlier because you touched on pesticides in Africa. To what extent do the folks in Hawaii try to use insecticides to try and control mosquito populations? And is that doing more harm than good, or not really? I don't know. There's a good question asked.
That's a really great question. And it's like kind of what you say, is to put in the balance the good and the bad. The problem in Hawaii is one of the most diverse islands with different species. If you apply pesticides, the risk is that it will cause more harm than good because you will kill other species. So that is kind of taken out of an option for Hawaii, or using like spraying the forest with pesticides, because you will pollute everything. Water where different species live, like invertebrates, like vertebrates, other insects, bees, all this. So that's not an option. And the other bad experience is like, for everybody, I am sure, hear about DDT. That was massively used before to control. It was started to control malaria in Africa, and it developed really bad resistance. Now, like, there is a lot of resistance to that. And now, again, in malaria with pyrethroids, they came with pyrethroids with Belinda Gates Foundation. They were using, like, from 2000 to 2010, 10 years, mosquitoes developed resistance now to first was DDT. Now it's pyrethroids. So since that mosquitoes kind of evolve fast this resistance, and it's mainly because they have a very short life cycle. So it's like a local example. The Asian tiger mosquito that we have in our backyards, the very annoying mosquito that bites all day long, the striped legs. This mosquito arrived in the US in 1980 to Texas. It was found in this shipment of used tires that came from Japan, because used tires were cheaper. There are some theories that already arrived after World War II when they brought back tires from planes, but they say that maybe it was the first population that was introduced, but really shipments of used tires was introduced in Texas. But now from Texas, in like 30 years, they are now close to Canada because they figured out, they evolved to survive winter because this mosquito was for tropical place, and they invaded also South America. So the scientists were studying both populations, the North America and the South American population, to see how this mosquito was able to survive winter, and they evolved. I will simplify this because it's very more complex if you go into the chemical components, but they developed this kind of layer of wax around the egg. So they, when they lay the egg around September, October, before they're dying, for the next generation, they kind of lay this extra layer of wax around the eggs, and they lay their eggs like in different places randomly. So when the first rains coming April, May, it will float these eggs that were with this extra layer of wax that allow them to survive winter. But that was an evolution in 30 years that birds or us cannot evolve as fast as mosquitoes because of their very short life cycle, and they have these good ways to evolve. So that's the reason that mosquitoes are one of the most lethal creatures in our planet.
We had another question I wanted to get to, and then I had a final question. I know we're getting close to 7 o'clock. Chris had asked, are honeycreepers or other Hawaiian birds being affected by West Nile virus or bird flu? Because I know in the news we hear often about bird flu. Is that stuff showing up in Hawaii now too?
No bird flu, but there is another risk now that West Nile can become another big issue in Hawaii. Still, no, but there are some projections with all the invasions that West Nile can become adding another big problem. That's true. That can become another big problem for the birds in Hawaii. Kind of what happened here when first show up, like in New York some years ago, and killed a lot of bird populations. So that's a high with the crows and everything that we have here. That was a big West Nile. There we don't have the population of crows in Hawaii, but there is some studies that with all these invasions and things, there are predictions that it can be like a big problem.
That's
also there is another one probably that you hear in Guam. There is a big invasion of the brown tree snakes.
Oh, we don't want to get snakes in Hawaii. That's bad.
We don't want to get that because it destroys also the avian species in Guam, because they are terrible predators for eggs and chicks. So that's another thing they are taking really close control now. So there are the two other things, that West Nile virus and snakes. Another thing that can be, there is like kind of like knocking the door in Hawaii. Yep.
Yeah, I think I remember when I was in Hawaii, someone was telling me that it's you can't have a pet snake, or there's a lot of like laws against it because they're afraid they're going to get released and suddenly take over, because there are no snakes in Hawaii naturally. So I wanted to ask a question that I like to ask all of my guests. Kind of like what got you here? Like what led you to study the environmental sciences, and specifically the impacts of climate on vector-borne diseases? And because we have a lot of students that are probably listening in, and a lot of times they'll hear about our speakers talk and they'll think, I want to do what you're doing. So can you maybe give us a little bit of the context of what led you to this?
Well, first, I grew in a very rural area, in a farm more specific, and I saw like how viruses can be very detrimental. For example, to potatoes. Potato virus A, potato leaf roll virus, it can really like destroy whole plantations of crops. So it was very interesting since then to see like, and also I saw firsthand when I finished college and I went to work in this nonprofit organization in the Andes of Peru at 12,000 feet of altitude. And I saw how global warming was changing the landscape, that potatoes cannot grow anymore. It was too warm. Potatoes need cold environments for tuberization. So what farmers start to do, it was like moving kind of the honeycreepers, going higher, higher, higher. But how high can you go? Mountains has a limit. You cannot go above the mountain. So that is happening. And all these called my attention to work on how vector-borne diseases. And my interest started with that. And after I was starting to work, I had opportunity to work on human vector-borne diseases on malaria, really called my attention. And currently I am working on the 3 vector-borne diseases. I am working on with human malaria.
Mm-hmm.
I am working now with avian malaria. And currently I am still finishing these papers, how global warming is going to affect transmission of viruses in plants.
Oh,
Working
wow.
with aphids, aphids can transmit more than 300 viruses in plants.
Oh.
And they can affect like corn, they can affect potatoes, they can affect wheat. So now we have been studying with the International Potato Center and ICP in Kenya, that's the Insect Center for Ecology and Physiology of Insects. We were working in this big project. Unfortunately, with all the change about like people around these days don't like too much research about global warming, we didn't get the funds to continue, unfortunately, this research, but we were able to collect enough data to show like global warming is going to have a big impact on the transmission of viruses in plants. So all of these call my attention, and they are very related to rural communities, especially where I come from, the most like vulnerable communities, because they won't be able to deal with this, let's say, food security. If crop yields go down by 50, already crop yields are going down just because of change of precipitations and change in temperature. You add now issues with pests and diseases because of global warming, probably crop yields will go down even more. When people will experience famine, and people will need to migrate to different areas, which is another issue of immigration, or products just will increase the price. The farmers will need to do one of these. People will need to migrate, or they will increase the price. And I really trying to predict where are these vectors moving in the next years, where these viruses or these parasites or pathogens in general are going to move with these vectors, which country will have issues with transmission of viruses for plants, for wildlife, and humans. So that's my big questions. How to prepare these new places, these new regions, get ready for surveillance. Don't wait until you get the problem. It's cheaper to prevent than cure. So that's the way I am trying to do, like with my collaborators, like the International Potato Center, the USGS in Hawaii. They are doing an amazing job there. Like anybody who goes to Hawaii, visit the Pacific Island Ecosystem Restoration Center. There is an amazing group of scientists working on mosquitoes, working on forests, working on corals, working on, can imagine in Hawaii. They are doing an amazing job, and that was one of my best experiences as a postdoc.
Well, thank you for sharing your work with us, and I really appreciate your passion and your proactive approach to. I mean, climate change is not going to stop changing, depending on like the state of the world. It's just going to keep happening, and we have to get out ahead and anticipate where these changes are going to lead in terms of vector-borne diseases, in terms of protecting ecosystems, and like you said, like investing in our planet. So I really appreciate our conversation today, and I was able to ask some of the questions that were asked in the chat, but unfortunately I didn't get to all of them. But I want to say thank you to our audience, and this was recorded, so I will send out the recording tomorrow. And if you have any follow-up questions for Oswaldo, feel free to reach out at that time. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy your night, and I will end the meeting.
And thank you so much, Jen, and thank you, everybody. And please feel free to email me if you have any question. It was a pleasure, and thank you again.
Thank you.